What is one thing that is lacking in science classrooms in America? I believe there's a critical piece to science education that we need to start emphasizing, whether it's middle school, high school, or college. Now, it might take different forms in each of those categories, but this should be taught at some level. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the philosophy of science. My name is Amos Tarfa, and I'm the director of Life STEM Academy in Moorhead, Minnesota. In this video, I want to talk to you about a missing piece in our science education. Now, I love science and math. My background is I have a bachelor's in chemistry, I have a master's in medical physics, and a master's in medical health physics, and then I have a PhD in, I did 1 year of a PhD program in chemistry as well as STEM education. And one of the things that I've realized along the way is that philosophy is missing in the science education of our students. One thing I forgot to add, or that I was going to come back and address, is that I have a minor in philosophy from my undergraduate days. And so what happened was I went to the university, a university in Wisconsin, and I heard about the philosophy class, right? So I was a chemistry major. I didn't have to take philosophy, but I had a great conversation with the instructor, learning about the philosophy that he was teaching, and I didn't agree with some of the maybe what his stance was on certain things, but we had a great conversation, which is one of the things that I think is lacking in our culture, but that's not the point of this video. People need to learn how to talk to people who might be different, different from them on different views. But I met this gentleman, very kind, gentleman, great guy. We had a wonderful conversation, at least an introduction to what he was doing in philosophy. In an introductory philosophy class, they teach things like, does God exist? They teach questions, things about ethics, which is a class on its own, but they might cover some of that in an introductory philosophy class. But as a Christian on that campus, I basically shared with him that I believed in God, and I pray, I read my Bible, and I really believe what I believe, right? So he told me to take his class, and he was teaching a class on the philosophy of science. And that changed my perspective. Like, it was amazing to be able to take a class that talks about science. And here's the cool thing. The book that we use for that class is actually right here. Oh, actually, I have 2 of them. I actually have 3 of the books here. One of them was called, What is This Thing Called Science? The other one was called Evolution, or Evolution, as the British would say, by Edward Larson. We have What is This Thing Called Science? And then we had a book called Darwin on Trial, which I also have on my stack here. So I basically took the class, and what was interesting is I had never paused to ask myself, what is science and how does it work, and why do some people think it has the answers to everything? So what I was doing is I was learning about the nature of science in this class. They talked about Thomas Kuhn. They talked about Karl Popper. They talked about these different people and their views on what science even is. When last have you asked yourself, like, what is science? And really dissected that, right? And so we went through these concepts of what is science, and then we went into the concept of evolution, the history of evolution. So those are the first 2 books that we read. Then we read Darwin on Trial, which gives us a perspective of Darwin on Trial, right? And then we read a book called Living with Darwin. So the book gave us an understanding of science, and then it showed us, and then the class took us into evolution, history of evolution, and just how we got to where we are in our understanding as of the writing of that book. And then it went into the topic of what are the things that people who don't believe in evolution, what do they believe? Or what is their reason for not believing evolution, right? And a lawyer wrote that book, right? But he was a part of a group of people who were scientists as well. So we had the evolution, Darwin on Trial, and then the last book. The last book in that class that we read was basically coming from a perspective of living with Darwin, right? So I go through the book. I believe Philip Johnson wrote Darwin on Trial. So I go through these 4 books. I have great conversations. And on April 1st of 2009, everything changed. So I was a chemistry major pre-med. That was the plan. And at this point, it became clear to me that I didn't want to become a doctor. Now, I wanted to be a doctor, be a pediatrician, so I can help kids, inspire kids to think about life and to flourish. So I always knew I wanted to help young people flourish. That's been in my heart. Part of why I'm in America today is because of the work I did, traveling to different high schools, sharing about how to be a good student and things like that. And those are things we teach at Life STEM Academy. Time management, study skills, note-taking skills, excelling on exams, and all of these things, right? But the thing is, after that philosophy class on April 1st of 2009, where an atheist or somebody who didn't believe in God came and shared about, the problem of suffering and pain and the non-existence of God, that kind of topic, when that happened that day, for me, I had some questions, I had some things I explained from my view, and I explained how there has to be objective morality to be able to say good and evil, and if there's objective morality, then, or if there's a standard, then where does the standard come from? And that for Christians, we say God gave us the law, and then from there we can define good and evil. So those kinds of conversations were happening on April 1st in a classroom in Wisconsin. After the class, we went to the faculty lounge and had a good dialogue. And so that was sort of my opportunity to engage more with this philosopher who was visiting from out of town. After that meeting, I said, I can't do it. I can't be a doctor and have people come into the hospital room and say things that, might have some logical flaws that we need to hash out, right? It would be better for me to maybe discuss those with them in a classroom setting. So I left the track of a medical track and moved to the track of more education, maybe get a PhD or do things like that. Now, the short story of that is I left that track, but I got a teaching job in a high school, which was one of the best things that happened because I was able to work with young people more. And then I met my wife along the way there. I met her, I was teaching, and I didn't want to travel to a different state to like Texas to get a PhD. So I put the PhD on hold, taught for a few years, started a tutoring center, got my master's in medical physics and medical health physics, and then did the PhD, 1 year of PhD in Fargo, and then started the STEM Academy, right? Life STEM Academy. Sorry, that's just a little bit of kind of how we've gotten to where we are. So in this show, we talk about education, we talk about apologetics, we talk about life, we talk about what book I'm reading. There's a segment called What Book is Amos Reading, or What Books is he considering? So just, for those who are wondering what book to read next, you can do that as well. But why is philosophy important in the teaching of science? If you've watched the debate between John Lennox and Richard Dawkins, you will notice that Richard Dawkins does not do a good job of articulating some of his points. And this is the case with many scientists who are standing on science to try and speak philosophically, or who don't have the philosophical training, so to speak, and are trying to engage with people that have that, right? So John Lennox is a mathematician, but he also has training in philosophy. So he approaches things a little different. And please know that I want Richard Dawkins to know the truth, just as I want anyone to know the truth, right? I'm a Christian who is also a scientist who loves Jesus and wants people to know Jesus. That's ultimately my goal. I want people to know Jesus, to know that there's redemption that can be found in Jesus Christ. On the cross, right? If I can just pause for a second, the Bible teaches that there's a holy God who created the heavens and the earth. God created the heavens and the earth, and you can see his evidence in the world, right? This is called the return of the God hypothesis. Sorry, I have a book that just slid off the table there. The return of the God hypothesis. We're going to be doing a book study on this, and you can follow along once we finish our book study on Can Science Explain Everything, which is right here by John Lennox. Sorry, it seemed like I'm all over the place, but I'm just trying to refer to some books that are important in this journey on this podcast. So, The Return of the God Hypothesis and other books like it talk about the fact that science seems to be pointing us more and more to God. Here's a book that we use for our biology students at Life STEM Academy called Discovering Design with Biology. So Discovering Design with Biology is coming from that perspective as well. There is design in the universe. There is DNA. There is the fine-tuning of the universe. These things are real. Like, these are real issues that people have to face. And sometimes, people are like, just give it time, or evolution can do this, evolution can do that. That's just not true. You're believing it by faith. Okay, sorry, I'm going off tangent. The point I'm trying to make there is that there is evidence that points to design in the universe. And actually, our school is going to be hosting someone in a couple of weeks on February 13th at 6:30. The doors open at 6. At 6:30, we're going to have Casey Luskin, Dr. Casey Luskin, share with us about just evolution and some of the weaknesses of evolution, as well as I'm sure he would touch on science and faith. He's done work with William Dembski. He's done work with Stephen Meyer. He works with Stephen Meyer now at the Discovery Institute in Seattle. And we're excited to see Casey. I've met Casey before, and I'm excited to see him again in the Fargo-Moorhead area. He's going to be at NDSU on the 12th of February, and then he will come to our school on the 13th. Please feel free to let people know if they live in the Fargo-Moorhead area. They can email me, amostarfa1@gmail.com, if they want information. But basically, we're going to have an event where we talk about science and faith with the community. So, okay, where do we go from here? So basically, when you look at the issue of Richard Dawkins and John Lennox having a debate, you would notice the different approach that John Lennox might come with because he has philosophy training, right? We need our scientists to know philosophy so they understand the limits of science and understand what science cannot explain. Sometimes scientists start explaining something, and before you know it, they've gone into philosophy, and they might still want you to treat them with, allow them to treat their discussion with authority, even though they're in the realm of philosophy, not science, right? So our scientists need to know philosophy, which will help them to be humble in how they approach as science. I really think it's critical that every school should teach philosophy. So what are we going to do different in LifeSTEM Academy or the co-ops that we help start, right? So LifeSTEM Academy is a hybrid school that meets 2 days a week, and then the rest of the week the students are working from home. This year, we've allowed for more of a 5-day structure to help certain students, but even that is coming to an end. We believe that Monday through Thursday is enough. Even if we had all the money in the world, we believe that a 4-day school is more than sufficient, right? But ideally, you want to have a 2-day model where you come 2 days a week, and then the rest of the week you complete the work that has been assigned to you, right? And parents who are, parents we work with at LifeSTEM Academy know that we are there for them. We support them through difficult situations where maybe Johnny is not doing well in his biology and he needs more notes or strategies. We find strategies to help Johnny do better. So that's part of why we're here. LifeSTEM Academy is here to support homeschool families or people who want to leave the public school, right, and find a way to homeschool and have support at the same time. That's what LifeSTEM Academy is seeking to do, is to provide the best homeschool hybrid option where there's collaboration, where Christ is exalted, where character is being developed, where content is being mastered, where career preparation is happening, where community is being built. I mean, how cool is it that people from one family invite the school to come to their house and learn about finance or real estate or this or that? And so these kids, we want to limit the time they use smartphones and increase the time they're engaging with other students in a collaboration. I think one of the coolest stories in the history of science, and why I think everybody needs to learn the history and philosophy of science, I'm going to tell you one of the coolest stories and then I'll land my plane. There's a book here about a scientist named Michael Faraday. Michael Faraday, his life and his work, that's what we have here. Michael Faraday was born in the 1700s, and he was a hard-working man, born into a poor state of affairs, and they would eat one loaf of bread over 7 days. So very poor, but he was very focused on working hard. And so he met Humphrey Davy, who was a famous scientist at the time, and he asked Humphrey Davy to give him a chance. Humphrey Davy gave him a chance, and he was able to do some work at the Royal Institution in England. Michael Faraday was very good at his task, so he was doing his experiments, but then he was doing some things off on the side. He was so diligent, right? Over time, he got opportunities to start giving lectures. He did a lot of things to help people. And then he did something called the famous Christmas Day lectures. They used to do that. And I actually found a YouTube video where they tried to replicate, some of his videos. One of them is like the candle. He talks about candles and the science of candles. Anyways, we could talk about that in another video at some point. But Michael Faraday was a fascinating individual. Now, imagine all our students here who are going to school, getting degrees in science courses, but they're not learning the history and philosophy of science, that which led those scientists to do what they did. See, back in the day, in the 1800s and maybe 1800s, a lot of those scientists were aware of what was happening, right? They were aware of the work that this guy was doing, which they wanted to take and expand and adjust, right? So that's part of what they were doing with their time. We need our students to do the same. And that's why Jay Wiles, the author of the book I showed you, Discovering Design with Biology, he's written books like Science in the Scientific Revolution, Science in the Ancient World, Science in the Age of Reason. He's written these books with a science history perspective, which is great. And that's why we use Jay Wiles' book for our science curriculum, because we want the history of science to be taught. And you could couple it with John Tyner's books. You could couple it with Sunlight curriculum that has books on the history of medicine, which is also from John Tyner. So you basically take a curriculum that has the history of science being taught, and then you take curriculums that just focus on teaching the history, like the history of medicine, history of physics, history of biology, history of chemistry, history of mathematics. If you give your child those tools, and I have a whole video of some of that, I'll try and link it in the description. If you give your child those tools, you're going to be raising a scientist that can think clearly. And this is my encouragement to co-ops, is that when you have a co-op, consider using a book like that. Do the experiments on the days that you meet. Do presentations on the days that you meet, right? So if I could focus on our science for a second, we want our students to be able to do research and present on what they've learned. Get comfortable giving presentations. to their classmates, right? That's one thing. When you homeschool and your child is presenting to you, it's one thing. But imagine if they're getting comfortable presenting to people they don't know. They're presenting to different audiences. That's a good skill that I believe co-ops and hybrid schools can do. Now, again, with a co-op, it's a little more relaxed. You're all homeschooled, and there's volunteers or maybe people who are paid just a small stipend to teach. And that's how a co-op could function. And churches should really consider starting co-ops, especially if they have a lot of kids in public school who are looking for a place to get godly counsel and learn from that perspective. But then there's homeschool hybrid, which for us, our homeschool hybrid has multiple teachers that have degrees in education, and therefore it's a little more rigid in how it works. Co-ops could be a little more flexible. So when you're thinking about options for homeschooling, co-ops, homeschool hybrid, those are good ways to think about things. But here's the thing. You also have to think about what are your goals, what are the things you want to accomplish that year. Anyways, we'll do a video comparing homeschool hybrid and co-ops in general and how churches can consider starting co-ops. Lifestem Academy is a homeschool hybrid program that seeks to engage with those 5 C's that we call. We call it the 5 C's, even though I've added a 6th one now called collaboration. And so I brought up Michael Faraday in this discussion, right? He understood the nature of science. So did James Clerk Maxwell, one of my best friends sort of in the history of science. Maxwell died in 1879. But what I mean is I like the guy. He's very good at what he did, and he was very humble in his approach. So was Michael Faraday. Faraday, at the end of his life, by the way, ended up getting a house from the Queen of England. He did so much good work. But he met James Clerk Maxwell, and there was collaboration, and Maxwell was able to give us Maxwell's equations. One of the famous things about Faraday is that he was able to show that electricity and magnetism have a connection. But then James Clerk Maxwell, was able to show the mathematical side to that, right? There's things you do with electricity that can cause magnetism to happen. There's things you could do with magnetism to allow an electric current to occur, right? So there's a connection between these two things. Now, this was around the time of people like Voltaire. I'm sorry, not Voltaire. Voltaire was a French writer. He was a character, but not him. We're talking about Volta. We're talking about Volta, the Italian scientist. We're talking about Ohm's law. When you think of Ohm's law, well, who's Ohm? Where's Ohm come from? Ampere. Who's Ampere? These are people that you should know, understand what they were trying to do. And so Faraday understood what was happening, and then he did experiments. He expanded our knowledge of electromagnetism. James Clerk Maxwell came. He gave us the equations. Maxwell also showed us that light was electromagnetic radiation, which gave rise to some of the work that people like Einstein and Heinrich Hertz. The frequency, the unit for frequency is hertz, right? So think about how knowing the names and the people, you begin to think, that's why they did that. Now, if you could take a child and put them in a situation where they are understanding why the scientists were studying the thing that they were studying at the time, that changes everything. Because a lot of the young people today have already seen these things come into existence. But how cool would it be to take them back and tell them, you're in 1881. This is what's going on in the world. Or you're in 1870. The Franco-Prussian War happens. Or you go to 1800s with Napoleon and people like Carnot, right, the mechanical engineer. You begin to learn that, okay, there's a war going on, so there's principles of engineering that need to happen, right? Isn't it cool to be able to take the science, the history, and then the philosophical understanding of what science is and the relationships that go around with, knowing the problem, finding the solution. Philosophy of science will humble people to be able to listen better. Scientists need to stop saying that we can get the answers from science. The answers are there, right? I gave a talk in Chicago called Can Science Explain Everything, which was going off of some of the teaching of John Lennox, Dr. John Lennox. And part of what I explain and part of what Lennox explains again is that science cannot explain the question of where did we come from, why are we here, how should we live, and where do we go when we die. Science can show you how to work with genes and DNA and so on and so forth, but can it explain maybe areas where you should or shouldn't go? You see what I mean? And so these are things that science might not be able to explain. So who do you turn to for that? Well, there's theology and philosophy that we can have discussions about. Every scientist should humble themselves and learn some philosophy and some theology. Isaac Newton wrote more about theology than he did about physics. We need to rethink how we train this generation of scientists. The time has come. Lifestem Academy has a commitment to do that. whether it's our online program that we're hoping to grow in, or any in-person activities or classes we do, we want our students to be diligent learners of the philosophy, the history and philosophy of science, while they learn the concepts and the principles that they're learning in science. We want our students to learn everything about the evidence that people give for evolution. Like, here's an evolutionary biologist. Let him lay it down. Tell us every reason why you think evolution is true. And then let's bring someone who has a view on intelligent design. And let's bring someone who has a view on creation. I know where I stand, and I've made it clear. In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. That's why things make sense, right? C.S. Lewis said men became scientists because they believed in the law, right? And ultimately, in the law of nature, right? And there's a lawgiver, right? There's a lawgiver that gave us the laws of nature, which scientists are trying to study. That's part of how it comes. And I can find the exact quote later. But C.S. Lewis basically says that people were studying the laws of nature, which then helped them to know more about who God was. Galileo, Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton, James Clerk Maxwell, Michael Faraday, John Lennox, James Tour, on and on and on. You can be a scientist and a Christian. And so we need people to realize that when they go to these different universities where they're told, oh, leave science over there, leave science there and leave faith there, don't try to mix them. That's just not so in what we learn about people like Maxwell and some of these guys. They were teaching in their churches or involved in their churches on Sunday and doing their science experiments on Monday. Joseph Priestley, one of the people that is responsible for, we talk about who found oxygen or who discovered oxygen and some of that, right? There's three people that we discuss with that. We have Carl Scheele, the Swedish chemist, who was actually an apothecary. So we have Carl Scheele, right? He was like working for a guy who would basically be like a pharmacist of today. We have Carl Scheele, Joseph Priestley, and Antoine Lavoisier. Those are the three people that we talk about in terms of who discovered oxygen. But Joseph Priestley, again, you're teaching the Bible on Sunday, you're doing science on Monday. We need to be okay with talking about life, faith, philosophy, science, all of the above. There's no reason to segregate those. And so I'll leave you with my last thing for the week. Here's my last thing. Everyone who is serious about apologetics and about understanding, different aspects of just, intellectual pieces to the puzzle here, so to speak, there's a few people I would highly recommend that you know. And so I'll list them off. You can spend some time researching, and we'll keep this journey going, hopefully, God willing. If you want to support the work that we're doing in apologetics and science and faith, please feel free to send me an email or use the link in the description to support our work. So here's the people. Number one, John Lennox. Now, he's written a new book now on career and work, which is wonderful. Dr. John Lennox, Oxford University Professor Emeritus, wonderful writings and teachings on the history and philosophy of science. Number two, James Tour. Rice University does wonderful work in nanoscience. He does organic chemistry. He does great work and does great work on discussing the topic of origin of life research. Number three, Stephen Meyer, philosopher of science out in Seattle, Washington, got his degree from Cambridge University, has a background in physics, has written a book called The Return of the God Hypothesis. Great book. Before I go to number four, quick commercial. Number 3.5, or like another just on the side. I think Eric Metaxas does a good job writing. He has a book, called Is Atheism Dead? So I think Eric Metaxas is a good resource that you can also tap into as a book like that, right? Please keep in mind, though, that there are people who are theistic evolutionists out there. And I'm not saying that of Eric Metaxas, but I'm just giving you a heads up. So I know I mentioned evolution here, but this topic is a little, there's a lot of pieces there. We can break it down. There's creationists, there's young earth creationists, old earth creationists. There's people who believe in intelligent design that are not creationists. Then there's people who believe in theistic evolution. Then there's people who believe in Darwinian evolution, natural selection as a means. And so notice there's different categories there. So that it's important to delineate all that. So if you have a good notebook, go ahead and write them out. And then you can review the arguments from each camp, so to speak. Okay, so we had John Lennox, we have James Tour, we have Stephen Meyer, we have Thomas Sowell. I'm adding him there because of the social piece of helping people think through things well on a social dimension. So we have Thomas Sowell, Dr. Thomas Sowell. He's at Stanford University, the Hoover Institute. He's written a lot of great books, and I'm working on his book, Discrimination and Disparities. Great guy. And then number 5 might shock you, actually. Number 5 now, at least these days, actually, there's going to have to be one more bonus. But number 5, for who Christians should know in apologetics, is a man by the name of Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's at Stanford University. I bring him up because he's a neuroscientist and does work with like ophthalmology. The reason why he's interesting, though, is because there's a famous non-Christian by the name of Samuel Harris, who's also a neuroscientist. I believe has done some work or was trained at Stanford. And so you meet people out there sometimes who have read Sam Harris, right? And it's like, well, this guy's smart and he's a neuroscientist and he doesn't believe in God and this and that. But then you have Dr. Andrew Huberman on a podcast recently. I heard him say that he started reading the Bible, or he reads the Bible and he's learning, he's praying, and that was really cool to hear that. Now, I don't know anything else about Andrew Huberman's faith necessarily, but what I'm trying to say about Andrew Huberman, though, is that he has shown us, so to speak, using falsification, which comes from understanding things like what is this thing called science, but he has shown us that it is possible to be a neuroscientist, PhD, very smart, right? The brain is complicated, and Andrew Huberman is saying that, yeah, reading the Bible, praying, like, you're not crazy if you do that. There are college professors out there that would say that you're crazy if you do that, right? Like, you're in a science class, you're in biology, why are you bringing up this talk about faith, you know? Now, I understand there's some atheists out there or agnostics who are more gentle towards people who don't believe, but I'm just saying there are some harsh professors who think and insult others who have faith, right? Even though everybody has faith, right? Because you can't answer how a universe that is so designed and so beautiful and elegant, you can't explain how that came from nothing, right? You can't explain how there's no designer, but we have all this beauty of design in nature. Okay, another topic for another day. The last individual I was going to mention, as I mentioned, is that this is another bonus, will be Jordan Peterson. Now, Dr. Jordan Peterson, from what I know, is not a believer at this moment. He's not a Christian, a Bible-believing Christian. From what I've heard him say, that could change, and that might change as I'm recording this video. So please have mercy as I explain this part. But the reason why I think it's important for people to know who Jordan Peterson is just a little bit about his background in psychology out in Toronto and the work he did and what led him to basically have a very difficult time with the university there in Toronto, right? I think it's just good to be aware of that, and some of that type of behavior is going to happen. If you believe that God created them male and female, if you believe that the Bible is God's word and the Bible should be our guide, if you believe that marriage is between one man and one woman, if you believe the fundamentals of Christianity in America today, there are elements of persecution that could come from that. And it happened to someone who at the time, again, was not a Christian. So if they're being persecuted, then the Christians need to be ready. So you need to be able to defend your faith and what you stand for. And so anyways, those are some of the people. We'll recap who they are again. We have Dr. John Lennox, mathematician and philosopher of science. We have Dr. James Torr, chemist at Rice University. We have Dr. Stephen Meyer at Discovery Institute and philosopher of science. We have Eric Metaxas as a bonus off on the side. We have Dr. Thomas Sowell, who can help with the social understanding of culture and just some of the lies that are taught by the many colleges out there and many news media outlets. There's a lot of lies out there, and it's good to be able to just sit down with a man who loves to write about thinking clearly. And then number 5, we have Dr. Andrew Huberman, who, again, I just know from some of what I've listened to, some of what I've read, it's pretty cool that a neuroscientist here is sharing and being humble about the fact that, hey, I read my Bible and I pray. That's cool. And I pray that he grows in understanding what the Bible is teaching, as we all need to grow. I just think it's really cool, and I'm happy to see the work that he's willing to share that in his interviews and openly. And then number 6, we said, was Jordan Peterson, which, again, we're just bringing him up because people in culture, a lot of people know him. I don't agree with everything he believes, but he has some lessons and things you can learn from. And I bring him up just because he's making there's a lot of influence in culture. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, objections, you can leave them in the description. Please be kind. You won't agree with everything I say, but please understand that I've spent quite a bit of time, by God's grace, over 10, 15 years, thinking through some of these things that I'm sharing. And I'm only going to be studying more. I'm going to be studying the history and philosophy of science more. I'm going to be studying more works in apologetics. And so stay tuned on this channel for videos like that. Our students at Lifestem Academy are going to be getting a lot more of these kinds of resources. And yeah, if you know anybody who will be interested to join Lifestem Academy, support Lifestem Academy and the work that we're doing, feel free to send me an email. I will be excited to share more and just see how we can be of support. And if you want to start a co-op in your church or somewhere around the U.S. or beyond, please feel free to reach out as well. I love places where young people go to learn and thrive. Take care. God bless. Have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you next time. Same time, same station. God bless.